The Daily Stoic, 366 Meditations on Wisdom. Fear is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Many are harmed by fear itself, and many may have come to their fate while dreading fate. Only the paranoid survive. Andy Grove, a former CEO of Intel, famously said, "It might be true, but we also know that the paranoid often destroy themselves quicker and more spectacularly than any enemy." Seneca, with his access and insight into the most powerful elite in Rome, would have seen this dynamic play out quite vividly. Nero, the student whose excesses Seneca tried to curb, killed not only his own mother and wife, but eventually turned on Seneca, his mentor, too. The combination of power, fear, and mania can be deadly. The leader, convinced that he might be betrayed, acts first and betrays others first. Afraid that he's not well liked, he works so hard to get others to like him that it has the opposite effect. Convinced of mismanagement, he micromanages and becomes the source of the mismanagement. And on and on. The things we fear or dread, we blindly inflict on ourselves. The next time you are afraid of some supposedly disastrous outcome, remember that if you don't control your impulses, if you lose your self-control, you may be the very source of the disaster you so fear. It has happened to smarter and more powerful and more successful people. It can happen to us too. Did that make you feel better? You cry, "I'm suffering severe pain." Are you then relieved from feeling it if you bear it in an unmanly way? The next time someone gets upset near you, crying, yelling, breaking something, being pointed or cruel, watch how quickly this statement will stop them cold. I hope this is making you feel better, because of course it isn't. Only in the bubble of extreme emotion can we justify any of that kind of behavior, and when called to account for it, we usually feel sheepish or embarrassed. It's worth applying that standard to yourself. The next time you find yourself in the middle of a freakout, or moaning and groaning with flu-like symptoms, or crying tears of regret, just ask, is this actually making me feel better? Is this actually relieving any of the symptoms I wish were gone? You don't have to have an opinion. We have the power to hold no opinion about a thing and to not let it upset our state of mind, for things have no natural power to shape our judgments. Here's a funny exercise. Think about all the upsetting things you don't know about, stuff people might have said about you behind your back, mistakes you might have made that never came to your attention, things you dropped or lost without even realizing it. What's your reaction? You don't have one because you don't know about it. In other words, it is possible to hold no opinion about a negative thing. You just need to cultivate that power instead of wielding it accidentally, especially when having an opinion is likely to make us aggravated. Practice the ability of having absolutely no thoughts about something. Act as if you had no idea it ever occurred, or that you've never heard of it before. Let it become irrelevant or non-existent to you. It'll be a lot less powerful this way. Anger is bad fuel. There is no more stupefying thing than anger, nothing more bent on its own strength. If successful, none more arrogant. If foiled, none more insane. Since it's not driven back by weariness even in defeat, when fortune removes its adversary, it turns its teeth on itself. As the Stoics have said many times, getting angry almost never solves anything. Usually, it makes things worse. We get upset, then the other person gets upset. Now everyone is upset, and the problem is no closer to getting solved. Many successful people will try to tell you that anger is a powerful fuel in their lives. The desire to prove them all wrong, or shove it in their faces, has made many a millionaire. The anger at being called fat or stupid has created fine physical specimens and brilliant minds. The anger at being rejected has motivated many to carve their own path. But that's short-sighted. Such stories ignore the pollution produced as a side effect and the wear and tear it put on the engine. It ignores what happens when that initial anger runs out, and how now more and more must be generated to keep the machine going, until, eventually, the only source left is anger at oneself. Hate is too great a burden to bear, Martin Luther King Jr. warned his fellow civil rights leaders in 1967, even though they had every reason to respond to hate with hate. The same is true for anger. In fact, it's true for most extreme emotions. They are toxic fuel. There's plenty of it out in the world, no question, but never worth the costs that come along with it. Hero or Nero. Our soul is sometimes a king, and sometimes a tyrant. A king, by attending to what is honorable, protects the good health of the body in its care, and gives it no base or sordid command. But an uncontrolled, desire-fueled, overindulged soul is turned from a king into that most feared and detested thing, a tyrant. There is that saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. At first glance, that's true. Seneca's pupil Nero and his litany of crimes and murders is a perfect example. Another emperor, Domitian, arbitrarily banished all philosophers from Rome. Epictetus was forced to flee as a result. Many of Rome's emperors were tyrants. Yet, not many years later, Epictetus would become a close friend of another emperor, Hadrian, who would help Marcus Aurelius to the throne, one of the truest examples of a wise philosopher king. So it's not so clear that power always corrupts. In fact, it looks like it comes down, in many ways, to the inner strength and self-awareness of individuals, what they value, what desires they keep in check, whether their understanding of fairness and justice can counteract the temptations of unlimited wealth and deference. The same is true for you, both personally and professionally. Tyrant or king, hero or Nero, which will you be? Protect your peace of mind. Keep constant guard over your perceptions, for it is no small thing you are protecting, but your respect, trustworthiness, and steadiness, peace of mind, freedom from pain and fear, in a word, your freedom. For what would you sell these things? The dysfunctional job that stresses you out, a contentious relationship, life in the spotlight. Stoicism, because it helps us manage and think through our emotional reactions, can make these kinds of situations easier to bear. It can help you manage and mitigate the triggers that seem to be so constantly tripped. But here's a question. Why are you subjecting yourself to this? Is this really the environment you were made for? To be provoked by nasty emails and an endless parade of workplace problems? Our adrenal glands can handle only so much before they become exhausted. Shouldn't you preserve them for life and death situations? So yes, use Stoicism to manage these difficulties. But don't forget to ask, is this really the life I want? Every time you get upset, a little bit of life leaves the body. Are these really the things on which you want to spend that priceless resource? Don't be afraid to make a change, a big one. Pleasure can become punishment. Whenever you get an impression of some pleasure, as with any impression, guard yourself from being carried away by it. Let it await your action. Give yourself a pause. After that, bring to mind both times. First when you have enjoyed the pleasure and later when you will regret it and hate yourself. Then compare to those the joy and satisfaction you'd feel for abstaining altogether. However, if a seemingly appropriate time arises to act on it, don't be overcome by its comfort, pleasantness, and allure. But against all of this, how much better the consciousness of conquering it. Self-control is a difficult thing, no question, which is why a popular trick from dieting might be helpful. Some diets allow a cheat day, one day per week in which dieters can eat anything and everything they want. Indeed, they're encouraged to write a list during the week of all the foods they craved so they can enjoy them all at once as a treat. The thinking being that if you're eating healthy 6 out of 7 days, you're still ahead. At first, this sounds like a dream, but anyone who has actually done this knows the truth. Each cheat day you eat yourself sick and hate yourself afterward. Soon enough, you're willingly abstaining from cheating at all, because you don't need it and you definitely don't want it. It's not unlike a parent catching her child with cigarettes and forcing him to smoke the whole pack. It's important to connect the so-called temptation with its actual effects. Once you understand that indulging might actually be worse than resisting, the urge begins to lose its appeal. In this way, self-control becomes the real pleasure, and the temptation becomes the regret. Think before you act. For to be wise is only one thing, to fix our attention on our intelligence, which guides all things everywhere. Why did I do that? You've probably asked yourself. We all have. How could I have been so stupid? What was I thinking? You weren't. That's the problem. Within that head of yours is all the reason and intelligence you need. It's making sure that it's deferred to and utilized that's the tough part. It's making sure that your mind is in charge, not your emotions, not your immediate physical sensations, not your surging hormones. Fix your attention on your intelligence. Let it do its thing. On the bad dreams. Clear your mind and get a hold on yourself and as when awakened from sleep and realizing it was only a bad dream upsetting you. Wake up and see that what's there is just like those dreams. The author Raymond Chandler was describing most of us when he wrote in a letter to his publisher, "I never looked back, although I had many uneasy periods looking forward." Thomas Jefferson once joked in a letter to John Adams, "How much pain have cost us the evils which have never happened?" And Seneca would put it best, "There is nothing so certain in our fears that's not yet more certain in the fact that most of what we dread comes to nothing." Many of the things that upset us, the Stoics believed, are a product of the imagination, not reality. Like dreams, they are vivid and realistic at the time, but preposterous once we come out of it. In a dream, we never stop to think and say, "Does this make any sense?" No, we go along with it. The same goes with our flights of anger or fear or other extreme emotions. Getting upset is like continuing the dream while you're awake. The thing that provoked you wasn't real, but your reaction was. And so from the fake comes real consequences, which is why you need to wake up right now instead of creating a nightmare. The source of your anxiety. When I see an anxious person, I ask myself, what do they want? For if a person wasn't wanting something outside of their own control, why would they be stricken by anxiety? Epictetus, Discourses 2.13.1. He, anxious father, worried about his children. What does he want? A world that is always safe. A frenzied traveler. What does she want? For the weather to hold and for traffic to part so she can make her flight. A nervous investor? That the market will turn around and an investment will pay off. All of these scenarios hold the same thing in common. As Epictetus says, it's wanting something outside our control. Getting worked up, getting excited, nervously pacing. These intense, pained, and anxious moments show us at our most futile and servile. Staring at the clock, at the ticker, at the next checkout lane over, at the sky. It's as if we all belong to a religious cult that believes the gods of fate will only give us what we want if we sacrifice our peace of mind. Today, when you find yourself getting anxious, ask yourself, why are my insides twisted into knots? Am I in control here, or is my anxiety? And most important, is my anxiety doing me any good? Philosophia's medicine of the soul. Don't return to philosophy as a taskmaster, but as patients seek out relief in a treatment of sore eyes, or a dressing for a burn, or from an ointment. Regarding it this way, you'll obey reason without putting it on display and rest easy in its care. The busier we get, the more we work and learn and read, the further we may drift. We get in a rhythm. We're making money, being creative, and we're stimulated and busy. It seems like everything is going well, but we drift further and further from philosophy. Eventually, this neglect will contribute to a problem. The stress builds up, our mind gets cloudy, we forget what's important, and result in an injury of some kind. When that happens, it's important that we tap the brakes. Put aside all the momentum and the moment. Return to the regimen and practices that we know are rooted in clarity, good judgment, good principles, and good health. Stoicism is designed to be medicine for the soul. It relieves us of the vulnerabilities of modern life. It restores us with the vigor we need to thrive in life. Check in with it today and let it do its healing. Passions and emotions. Keep this thought handy when you feel a fit of rage coming on. It isn't manly to be enraged. Rather, gentleness and civility are more human and therefore manlier. A real man doesn't give way to anger and discontent, and such a person has strength, courage, and endurance. Unlike the angry and complaining, the nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Why do athletes talk trash to each other? Why do they deliberately say offensive and nasty things to their competitors when the refs aren't looking? To provoke a reaction. Distracting and angering opponents is an easy way to knock them off their game. Try to remember that when you find yourself getting mad, anger is not impressive or tough, it's a mistake. It's weakness. Depending on what you're doing, it might even be a trap that someone laid for you. Fans and opponents called boxer Joe Louis the ring robot because he was utterly unemotional. His cold, calm demeanor was far more terrifying than any crazed look or emotional outburst would have been. Strength is the ability to maintain a hold of oneself. It's being the person who never gets mad, who cannot be rattled, because they are in control of their passions, rather than controlled by their passions. A proper frame of mind. Frame your thoughts like this. You are an old person. You won't let yourself be enslaved by this any longer, no longer pulled like a puppet by every impulse, and you'll stop complaining about your present fortune or dreading the future. We resent the person who comes in and tries to boss us around, or at least that's what we tell ourselves. Yet if someone says something we disagree with, something inside us tells us we have to argue with them. If there's a plate of cookies in front of us, we have to eat them. If someone does something we dislike, we have to get mad about it. When something bad happens, we have to be sad, depressed, or worried. But if something good happens a few minutes later, all of a sudden we're happy, excited, and want more. We would never let another person jerk us around the way we let our impulses do. It's time we start seeing it that way, that we're not puppets that can be made to dance this way or that way just because we feel like it. We should be the ones in control, not our emotions, because we are independent, self-sufficient people. On being invincible. Who then is invincible? The one who cannot be upset by anything outside their reasoned choice. Have you ever watched a seasoned pro handle the media? No question is too tough, no tone too pointed or insulting. They parry every blow with humor, poise, and patience. Even when stung or provoked, they choose not to flinch or react. They're able to do this not only because of training and experience, but because they understand that reacting emotionally will only make the situation worse. The media is waiting for them to slip up or get upset. So to successfully navigate press events, they have internalized the importance of keeping themselves under calm control. It's unlikely you'll face a horde of probing reporters bombarding you with insensitive questions today. But it might be helpful, whatever stresses or frustrations or overload that do come your way, to picture that image and use it as your model for dealing with them. Our reasoned choice, our proeresis, as the Stoics called it, is a kind of invincibility that we can cultivate. We can shrug off hostile attacks and breeze through pressure or problems. And, like our model, when we finish, we can point back into the crowd and say, "Next." Steady your impulses. Don't be bounced around, but submit every impulse to the claims of justice and protect your clear conviction in every appearance. Think of the manic people in your life. Not the ones suffering from an unfortunate disorder, but the ones whose lives and choices are in disorder. Everything is soaring highs or crushing lows. The day is either amazing or awful. Aren't those people exhausting? Don't you wish they just had a filter through which they could test the good impulses versus the bad ones? There is such a filter. Justice, reason, philosophy. If there's a central message of Stoic thought, it's this. Impulses of all kinds are going to come, and your work is to control them, like bringing a dog to heel. Put more simply, think before you act. Ask, who is in control here? What principles are guiding me? It has become a cliché to quote Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena speech, which leonizes the one whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, compared with the critic who sits on the sidelines. Roosevelt gave that speech shortly after he left office, at the height of his popularity. In a few years, he would run against his former protege in an attempt to retake the White House, losing badly and nearly assassinated in the process. He would also nearly die exploring a river in the Amazon, kill thousands of animals in African safaris, and then beg Woodrow Wilson to allow him to enlist in World War I. Despite being 59 years old, he would do a lot of things that seem somewhat baffling in retrospect. Theodore Roosevelt was a truly great man, but he was also driven by a compulsion, a work and activity addiction that was seemingly without end. Many of us share this affliction, being driven by something we can't control. We're afraid of being still, so we seek out strife and action as a distraction. We choose to be at war. In some cases, literally, when peace is in fact the more honorable and fitting choice. Yes, the man in the arena is admirable, as is the soldier and the politician and the businesswoman, and all the other occupations. But, and this is a big but, only if we're in the arena for the right reasons.